welcome. I know we have a lot of you returning from past town halls, so it's great to see you and excited for our conversation today. And I'm, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Erica Cohen-Moore. I am the Executive Director for the National Association of Catholic Chaplains, and I work with the Catholic Prison Ministries Coalition. And it's just wonderful to be here today to help guide this conversation. This is an incredible ministry. I'm based out of Seattle. It's currently raining, but that's no surprise. That's what happens here in Seattle through the winter. I think a lot of you are probably stuck in major snowstorms because that's what seems to be happening in a good part of the world. So just thank you for being with us today. So I will do a short introduction of Deacon Frank, but I will let him tell more of his story as he does his presentation today. And then he will also lead us in a prayer. Just Deacon Frank DiGirolamo is, he was a former colleague of mine at the Archdiocese of Seattle and just a wonderful human being and incredible in ministry, and has done so much in the area of human trafficking, especially in the area of sex trafficking. And that's what he'll share with us today. He is the director for deacons and senior priests at the Archdiocese of Seattle, and he also does a number of other things, as many ministers do. We have a lot more on our plates. He's been ordained a deacon since 2012, and he did some work in the pastoral world at a parish before that. And before that, he was actively involved in some HR in the corporate world. And what I know from Deacon Frank and his ministry is he did a lot, and he continues to do a lot with street ministry. He's a team member for Operation Night Watch, and then he's created a new group to work with sex trafficking survivors. So with that, I'm just going to hand it over to you, Deacon Frank.
Thanks, Erica. Hi, everybody. I can't see any of you, but it's a delight to be here with you. And so let us just acknowledge that we're always in God's presence, and perhaps we can pause here and ask God's blessing, devote this time. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, Lord, thank you for this day and for this time and this fellowship. And thanks for your promise to be with us as we do gather in your name, Lord. We welcome you. We surrender this time to you for your glory, that our wills might be conformed to your will. We especially pray for those who struggle with any type of enslavement, whether they're enslaved and victimized, or they're enslaved and they're committing acts against others. We have a common enemy, and it's evil, and you conquer evil, Lord. So just help us today to consider anew how you desire to lead us all to new life with one another in you. We ask all this most confidently, but most humbly through Christ our Lord. Amen. Holy Spirit. So thanks again, Erica. I'm honored to be here with you. I'm inspired by what you do all the time in your ministry. I hope that there's some relevance in the story I'm going to share with you. I'm going to tell the story about how we found ourselves doing some ministry in the area of sex trafficking. A lot of you will probably know everything I'm going to say and more. Please bear with me. Some of you, this might be some new information, and it's a heavy topic. So, you know, all those trigger warnings, take care of yourself as we go through this. You know, be assured of God's presence through all of this. Some of these topics might trigger some strong emotions in us. We'll just invite the Lord into all of that. But it's an honor to be here with you, especially on behalf of those who suffer a lot in our midst and are often unseen in the world. Full disclosure, I haven't been in detention ministry for a number of years. I did some volunteering in juvenile detention 12 or so years ago. And looking back, I'm aware that I was introduced to the reality that we were then in King County, Washington, arresting a lot of minors for prostitution. And it's like we had it so reversed. We were seeing them as the perpetrators. And I'm happy to say it might come up later in my presentation, but that's been reversed, and we're recognizing the victimization, the trauma that so many youth go through as they get lured into the world of sex trafficking. So with that, I'm calling this following Christ into ministry, following him into the ministry of sex trafficking. I think we find ourselves following a missionary impulse of some type. You know, it wasn't specific. We just said, Lord, where do you want us to go? And as Erica mentioned, my day job has nothing to do with this, but kind of tangentially, since I work with deacons, this topic kept surfacing through my discussions with my brothers. And we find ourselves just sort of following breadcrumbs. And what I'm humbly offering you today are just a series of those breadcrumbs we found, and I'll share resources with you, especially from a survivor perspective. I've had survivors say, if you look at one resource, look at this one. And if you can't even look at that, just pray about it. So I'm going to start there with our brothers and sisters who have gone through a lot of this. I approach today here with this song in my heart and the psalm in my heart, Psalm 51, the Psalm of David, his repentance. I enter this whole ministry knowing that I'm a sinner in need of mercy, and just thrilled to encounter Christ as I accompany others and as they accompany me. Some of the strongest believers I've met are trapped in the sex trade right now. And I also mentioned this song because Create in Me a Clean Heart is the title of a U.S. bishop's pastoral letter that has a lot to do with pornography and sex trafficking from 2015. So I'll list that as another resource later on. But I think when we go into this ministry, there's something valuable about always reminding us that let me be a channel of your peace, Lord. You know, let start with me so that I can hand on what I've received from you. Oh, by the way, I should say, for those of you who are linear, you're going to like that I have a slide deck that's linear. For those of you who are non-linear, you might already appreciate that I can bounce around. I have a mind that, in a strange way, loves to connect dots that aren't necessarily connected. So I love that, even with my hand gestures. But, you know, I will follow a timeline, and I'm going to leave plenty of room for us to engage in some dialogue, explore things together, for you to, you know, challenge maybe something I'm suggesting. I think that's awesome. Or for you to say, duh, Frank, why didn't you think of this? I'll take that. But I think we're on this journey together. And I'm trying to get rid of my little side screen here. Here we go. My introduction, our introduction here locally, really started some 9 years ago when I heard a beautiful presentation by the founder of a group locally in Seattle that was founded by some survivors and was committed to accompanying survivors from the sex trade. And all I really remember was being shocked at how much suffering is happening in our midst, like the thousands of people who are trafficked just in King County alone. And those thousands of people are purchased by more than 20,000 people in King County alone on a daily basis. That said, that, you know, 9 years ago, I heard it, I was moved by it. And then I think I remember going right back to work on a whole bunch of other stuff, but the seed was planted. And I think God allows those seeds to be planted for us, to take root over time. So just a couple years later, when the bishops came out with that pastoral letter I mentioned, I was able to see it. And to be totally honest, I was able to see it and read it and think, hey, more of this stuff that's really important. And then I kind of put it away for a while, but seeds planted again. If you're not familiar with that letter, the bishops structure it to reveal sexploitation in general and pornography in particular as a threat to the dignity of all people. So, you know, real quick aside, if I could wave a magic wand, I would abolish pornography, right? I think that's upstream from so many things. Small seed planted. The other language I loved was it's all about bringing the mercy, healing, and hope of Christ and reinforcing that idea of church as a field hospital. which I think is all powerful. We're fellow sinners. It's not about just reminding people of what was said in this dogmatic constitution. It's more about recognizing that there's healing and that mercy offered, and that will cast out any shame. So much shame here. The letter reminds us that some stuff we do really well, like education about the dignity of the person. We do that great. A whole bunch of other stuff we could either improve or start anew, like letting people know about the significance and the pervasiveness of the problem, and actually go out and accompany people and help to rescue them and find an off-ramp for them. Right? We can greatly improve there. And then they have this section with many audiences, and I'll get into this a little bit more detail later on, but including clergy, acknowledging that clergy struggle with pornography and probably exhibiting the behaviors of seeking to purchase, quite honestly. Youth, both as victims and as fellow perpetrators. Sexual assault nurse examiners will tell us more and more that they're seeing sexual assault among youth. The perpetrators sometimes as young as 5 to 7 years old, and it seems to be directly downstream from having access to pornography, and they're doing stuff to their siblings. Right? So there's a lot of harm going on. Those who consume the pornography are an audience we have to get in touch with. The spouses who go through betrayal. And more, right? So we get a sense there's a lot of audiences. A little bit later, I'll show you how those audiences are surfacing in a proposal we're making to our Archdiocese. I'm going to continue this timeline here then. In retrospect, things are clearer. That in 2018, I attended some training from the company called REST, Real Escape from the Sex Trade, and you'll have a link to that website. They told us a lot about the realities of the life, and that's where I met my first ever survivor of the sex trade. Met a young man who was from an affluent area, going to a private school, and was sex trafficked right down the street from his parents' house. Even while he was participating in extracurricular activities, doing his homework, he was trafficked right down the street. Eye-opening. I met with him months later. He's sort of on my informal board of directors that I keep. And he told me one resource. He said, if you do nothing else, please take a look at thelifestory.org. In it, you'll see stories of survivors, the many ways that they found themselves unwittingly captured in the world of the sex trade. More importantly, it goes on to show how anybody in a variety of fields, from healthcare to education, to all of us, we can recognize signs and we can offer off ramps. That's what's most encouraging. So I leave you with thelifestory.org. Examine it, very informative. And I think it hits the direct topic we're talking about today, how to accompany. I then pursued that training and I served in direct service to the sex trade survivor community as a janitor and in doing some food service at a drop-in center. Sometimes I would get to listen, but mainly I was a janitor. I was a man in a drop-in center where often it was mainly women who had been abused by men. I was clergy in a drop-in center where a lot of the women were abused by their clergy. So I was often a trigger. I think this is a really humbling approach. We want to serve. We're not always able to because of the traumas, right? We all know this. But I spent a year sweeping up, and the women would often come up to me later. If they said nothing else, they just say, thank you for showing me that a man doesn't always have to take advantage of us, and he can just serve. It gave me some new faith in men. Later on, I read a book that I highly recommend. It's called Girls Like Us by Rachel Lloyd, who's a survivor who's gone on to found her own organization that helps accompany people out of the trade. First person account, really powerful, shows you the psychological hold on people. So look, it's only 2018, right? It's still 4 years ago, and we're just waking up to the reality of survivors among us. That led us in part to offer some training on the effects of pornography. Again, realizing that's an upstream issue. The effects of pornography, we did it for all of our priests. This is not a popular topic. for anybody to gather. A lot of people recognize the harm, but we didn't have a lot of people clamoring to say, yay, I want to go to that. So many people didn't show. Many of the priests didn't show. Kind of heavy, maybe triggering. Overall went great. We learned about the effect of pornography on our brain and on our relationships and then on society. Really important stuff to study. Shortly afterward, I attended a little informal session on men's accountability in stopping sexual exploitation. We have a local group that I highly recommend you check out because they're growing nationally. It's called the Lantern Project. Used to be called Seattle Against Slavery. And they introduced us to this idea of toxic masculinity, the reality of toxic masculinity, that men are dysfunctionally formed by artificial pressure to be tough and not show emotion, and everything downstream from that ends up not being good, right? As opposed to vulnerability and loving intimacy. So that was eye-opening. A little later on, I invited Rest to come into all of our deacons for the Archdiocese. And they gave us a beautiful overall training on the dynamics of the sex trade, the reality of how it's happening in every parish boundary, helping us to open our eyes. And again, part of the glamour of this ministry of talking about it is we're met with a lot of dismissal and denial because we don't want to believe it and we never heard it talked about before. It was months after that a lot of people would come back and say, you know, I've been thinking about it and I think it makes sense to me. But I think a lot of this ministry is going through some punches in response to just suggesting that it's happening or pointing out that it's happening. Following the timeline, the next big thing we came upon was a powerful research article showing a linkage among pornography, sex trafficking, and abortion. Again, heavy stuff, not fun to talk about, but again, seeing pornography as this upstream issue. And hopefully by now we're planting seeds here of how great it would be to keep lobbying legally at a high level to make the conditions for pornography really difficult, make it difficult for pornographers, help to stem the tide of that demand side for pornography. So continued, we're still following that missionary impulse. During the pandemic, I came across a great article from a Dr. Boyer at our local University of Washington. And she was talking about the heightened negative effects on prostitution during the pandemic because of workplace changes, health concerns, and it all conspired in this toxic soup to make life for those being trafficked even worse. I'll have a link to that article, highly recommend it. Eye-opening again from a survivor's and victim's perspective. Well written. It was shortly after that I asked my friends from Rest to take me out with them to one of our local prostitution tracks. Most prostitution and trafficking happens electronically. It's arranged over 80% of the time online, and people just show up places. But we had this call to go meet people. So we visited. They were nervous that a man would be rejected, but they were pleasantly surprised that a man could minister out there. In fact, the ladies were saying it's refreshing to see a man show up to just be humble and serve when most of the men are just looking to buy us. It was shortly after that we went out and started a weekly prayer outreach routine with some fellow ministers and parishioners, just to do what Pope Francis calls us to do, right? Get up close, make love concrete, see faces, learn names, hear stories. And we've had hundreds of beautiful interactions, prayer requests, blessings. Last year on a whim, based on all of this, right? So everything we've experienced, we're carrying in our heart and in our prayer. And so on a whim, it hit me one day that we don't have anything on our Archdiocesan website that helps people learn more about this. And we've been learning slowly. How do we help other people come along the journey? And so just on a whim, I presented an idea for a simple web page of resources. And before I knew it, she said, yeah, but it would probably be good for you to come in and talk to senior leadership. So shortly thereafter, I was talking to our Archbishop, our Auxiliary Bishop, senior leadership from the Chancery, and it all happened so fast, but there was a lot of excitement and acknowledgement that, yes, it's incredibly important. It's a barrier to evangelization and ministry, and we're not doing anything about it. So they said, come back and show us how it can be a ministry. And so that's where we are right now. We're on the docket to discuss this with them in just a couple weeks. And what I thought I'd do is show you how all of this that we've talked about so far has surfaced in our recommendations. So this is just an excerpt from it. And these 5 topics that you'll see on your screen are the main 5 topics from the U.S. Bishop's pastoral letter. We decided to structure our ministry proposal based on what the bishops and others have already done. So from top to bottom, what we were thinking, what makes sense to us is we do the stuff at the top really well. In the middle 3, we could probably get better at it. And the last one, I don't see evidence that we're necessarily doing it at all as a Catholic church, but we have the opportunity to partner with people in the field. So we do great extolling the virtues of the human person and our being created in the image of God, right? The gift and language of the body, chastity. We can do that all day long. And we should keep doing that. In fact, let me go here. I think I got this. Great. So we got great content for all this. Formation, school programs, beautiful. Let's keep building on that. This middle 3 things, I think we can collaborate more to highlight this unpopular topic. And we do some of it, right? We have stuff happening already, but how do we take this not only to internal audiences, but beyond to the community by partnering with some external groups to talk about how this is harming our brains, our relationships, society. I think that makes sense, right? Shedding light on the harmful nature of pornography. And yes, I'm talking about pornography, which is directly upstream from sex trafficking. The basic premise is if folks weren't captivated by pornography and seeking more and more and more, and then seeking to act out on it, we would not have traffickers, pimps, boyfriends, luring vulnerable people into the sex trafficking industry. And I say industry because it's over $100 billion of industry worldwide. Right? One person selling 5 women will make $1 million in a year because the people who are being trafficked are sold over and over and over again. You know, it's systematic rape is what it is. So when we take a look at the closer effects of pornography, we see that downstream people are getting hurt horrifically. And the last one, we have the opportunity to show up as a field hospital, accompanying, hearing stories, offering mercy and healing and hope to these different target audiences. And it's some of the ones I've mentioned before, those exploited, those guilty of exploiting, the people who use, all that. I'm going to jump to the next slide and talk about this big growth area. We have suggested that we could marshal resources that we already have internally and partner with external folks to start to hit at least a number of these groups as an initial priority. Those exploited, how do we reach out, let them know that we know their pain, we have resources to help them find an off-ramp into transitional housing, job retraining, health. Right? The men who use is a big one, and the men who purchase by extension. We have ways to, through the Lantern Project and some other local organizations, including the King County Prosecutor's Office, which I'll tell you about in a second, to accompany these men and even to intercept them at the point of online purchasing to lovingly de-escalate and talk them down and remind them that what they're pursuing isn't going to satisfy. It's only going to cause more hurt. We're all caught up doing stuff we don't want to do by this. We have a common enemy. God wants to heal all that. We see a big opportunity to provide some healing for betrayed spouses, accompaniment, counseling, therapy, healing. And what kind of healing does God want to offer to them as well? How do we heal the marriage? Right? And not to dismiss the pastors and other clergy, the bishops were clear on this, that we struggle with this and we're not sure. That might be scandalous to say, but we're not sure. We can't guarantee that a lot of our clergy aren't struggling with this and doing things that they don't want to be doing and causing more harm. So a lot of sensitivity, a lot of triggers here. But again, mercy, healing, and hope through Christ is what we want to offer. So I think here we go. The final slide, just some key. These are just some of the resources. I want to talk internally and externally. Internally, and you might want to pursue this, right? We have our local Catholic conference. The bishops group from Washington State has a legal advocacy arm that keeps awareness of bills, issues, encourages all of the Catholics in the population to advocate for bills. This is a significant way that things change. So a lot of the barriers facing people who want to get out of the sex trade are legally related. They've been arrested before for prostitution. Can we expunge that record? Right? These are big things that I know you deal with a lot. We want to partner a lot with our pastoral ministries and faith formation offices, knowing that when we are speaking these truths, we may be speaking these truths of the dignity of the human person to people who are already wounded. So there's probably an opportunity to even further nuance how we offer the beauty of who they are as a reminder. But maybe there's something else that we have to add there if they've been through some trauma, help them explore healing. Catholic Schools office here locally really wants to partner with us on this. We see an opportunity to be even more explicit in an important way. This is all about a race to get to our kids. It's us or the pornographers often. And again, directly downstream from pornography exposure are these behaviors that immediately start to lure people into trafficking situations. External links, and I've rated them in priority order. If you look at nothing else from this webinar, take a look at the life story. You'll hear first-person accounts of people who have been lured into victimization and who have survived. Some of the strongest people I've ever met are current victims in the system, in the life. So take a look at that. It's very engaging, very informative, and I think it will help to illuminate our path together. If you looked at any two things, I would add the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. I professionally and ministerially love these people. You'll find them at endsexualexploitation.org. You can sign up for their newsletters, for their national conferences. You'll find a variety of video presentations archived. They have their own podcast series. And it's a beautiful way to learn a lot more, especially from a survivor's perspective, on what's needed for us to respond. It's not religious, it's not partisan. It's a common place for all of humanity to meet here at this National Center on Sexual Exploitation. And they're doing beautiful, virtuous, edifying, saving, merciful work. Boom, love it. Ending Exploitation Collaborative is an effort started here in King County in Seattle. And it's a group of prosecutors' offices from Seattle and King County and a couple survivor-run organizations. And they are working to go upstream and work on the demand side of sex trafficking. They're a big reason why the arrests have totally switched. We used to arrest those who are being trafficked and send the Johns home with their money, say, get home, get back to your wife, what are you doing? And now it's reversed, and they're trying to send a cultural message that the power is coming from the person who's buying, and the victims can't truly give consent. If you have to force, fraud, or coerce somebody into the sex trade, and then you have to give them money to do things, they can't give consent. And there's no such thing as consent. The survivors in the porn industry acknowledge the same thing. Yeah, I signed that document that said I give my consent to this film, but there's no such thing as consent when we really look at it. We know this. So those are the few top things. There's also a link for my friends at REST, the Real Escape from the Sex Trade. Perhaps you have a local Christian organization with you as well who ministers in the community and accompanies people, has a 24-hour hotline. They're one great example. Maybe you're called to start your own. I don't know. There's a link for the Lantern Project and their good work on men's accountability to stop sexual exploitation. This group has a men's accountability community locally where they keep talking to men about going upstream and figuring out what's going on. A couple last little resources I just threw in there. We haven't talked about them at all. But Businesses Ending Slavery and Trafficking is part of the Ending Exploitation Collaborative in King County. And they do a lot of partnering with hotels, for instance, to help them recognize signs of trafficking that might be going on in the midst. So really good organization there locally. And then the Mormon Church has this powerful website and documentary called Fight the New Drug, and they have a documentary called Head, Heart, World, where again, they're meeting society where they are to better understand these effects of pornography on our head, our heart, and on our relationships. I highly recommend it. I know that our topic is how to accompany people in trafficking. My suggestion is that a lot of this backstory, looking from a survivor's perspective, helps us to naturally do it and not just, inadvertently push more information or resources at them. So I just talked a lot. I love to listen and I love to dialogue. So thanks for bearing with me. I'm going to now go to this final slide with bigger font, and I'm going to open up my screen here. I hope that helped. I hope it made sense. I'm happy to really talk about anything. Just an honor to be with you today.
Yeah, thank you, Deacon Frank. That was lovely. Actually, could you stop sharing so everybody can see each other? We can see your faces.
Great. Oops. How do I stop sharing?
As he does that, I just want to say a few pieces to follow what Deacon Frank said. Deacon Frank, I might have you speak a little bit to what you're doing every week when you go out on the streets on Wednesday, because it's really profound and wonderful. Just to say that Deacon Frank's part of a team, and some of these team members actually work in our prisons and in our jails. One of his team members used to be the head of our juvie ministry, and he would bring some of these local organizations and invite them into, especially our juvenile centers, because it's a place where we can still get the kids are still listening, and so many of our kiddos that are in juvie have either been victimized or the victimizer in this area. And so, or whatever language we want to use around it. So if you have that capability in your own archdiocese to bring local organizations, if you have them, Seattle, we're blessed to have a lot of local resources. I know that's not true for where everybody's at, but if you can bring some of those resources into the juvie centers, into the prisons, we have found that has just been a tremendous dialogue and a tremendous help. Because you're beginning that conversation where we're at, and it might be a place where they can listen. And so just for the pastoral side and just accompanying, Deacon Frank, I'll definitely have you talk more about that. And around the advocacy piece, and Deacon Frank spoke to this as well, this is such a big part of our world, and this is something we can do now, even when we're kind of stuck in COVID, and a lot of us can't go into our institutions because they're not letting volunteers in. Advocacy is something we can continue to do. And like Deacon Frank said, one of the things we're really pushing is to change the narrative. So the woman or the man who is the survivor of human trafficking and sex trafficking, they're no longer the criminal, because for years they were the criminal. They're not the criminal. We still see a lot of them in our institutions, but they're not the criminal. And so how do we advocate and work with our legislative bodies, our Catholic advocacy groups to begin this conversation? And some of you are farther along than others. So with that, Deacon Frank, before I actually open it up to questions, and sorry to the group, but what is it you do? Can you talk a little bit about what you do on Wednesdays?
Yeah, it's not much. It's a mustard seed, but we keep getting signs from the women themselves that it's good. So we were always told it's all about consistency of showing up, because the rest of their life is chaos all day long. And we the friends we know, and we met scores of them by name, hundreds of them in interaction, they're out there for 12 hours a day or more, all weather, all year round. Their life is chaos, right? So just to consider that. So they said, if you're going to start something, Frank and others, be consistent. And so 1 to 1:30 p.m. Wednesday afternoon, directly beside the Firestone on a side street, which is public property, no one can kick us off. We just stand there and pray and greet, offer roses to folks. It's a tip we got from some friends in Atlanta, Georgia. We humbly offer you a rose as a reminder that you're loved by God, loved by us. And that, boom, it's like a shock, right? If I'm loved, you see the look on their face. I don't really feel love, but they love it in the moment. They appreciate it. And it's just relationship. And that we see signs that it's helpful, that every so often, one of our young lady friends will seek us out because she knows that we're there that time. And so she'll come from someplace else to see us. And she'll say, I need prayer. I have a lot of heaviness on my heart. I'm filled with much anxiety. And even that, great blessing. They say it takes 7 attempts to leave the life of sex trafficking because of the psychological hold. And we see little pieces of evidence of that just from our half hour per week. One lady who eventually left the life collected 20 hotline cards before she decided to act on it. Because she's like, I'm just abused all the time. If you really believe you're going to keep showing up here, you're going to keep offering me those cards. So she got like 3, 4 of them and said, I'm going to wait till I get 20 to see if they really mean it, because I need that evidence. So we just keep planting seeds. The last thing I'll say, Erica, at the risk of running too long here. Yesterday, a lady half my size named Mary, who's in her 70s, came walking up to us at the end of our outreach. And sweetest little lady. And she said, I just want you to know that I've seen you guys here for so long, and I've always wanted to say hi. And she just wanted to thank us for showing up to help the ladies and to disrupt the momentum of the life. A lot of other stories like that. I've had men who were seeking to purchase pull over and break down crying, saying, I need to get out of this. I'm a dad. I'm a bad dad. I need help. And all of a sudden, he's letting us give him prayer and blessing. And he drives by once in a while just to wave and say hi to us. So we're disrupting. And I think the droplets start to, the analogy, starting to move out, right? Starting to make some bigger waves. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
But it's this much. Yeah.
But and then there's a couple other questions that are great. But
Yeah.
What I've noticed is what you did is it started really, really small, and it just grows because people see what you're doing and it has impact. Yeah. And then how can we grow that into our facilities as well? And especially with those who are re-entering. So Harry has, sorry.
So yeah, the story about re-entry and partnering with organizations. Not every facility will allow other organizations to come in, but we just had a success with a federal detention center and REST. And Joe Cotton, one of our colleagues here from Seattle, helped us to connect with the chaplain on the inside. And the folks from REST were able to offer some materials and hotline information to some of the young ladies who were about to be going through reentry. And just gave like a little orientation. Hey, you're about to leave. Maybe this was a time to pause and reflect and consider an off-ramp. And we consider that a big win.
Yep, thank you. So the question, Harry had the question around when you work with a lot of these women and men who are stuck in trafficking, how much does drug use influence that?
Yeah, it probably keeps somebody in the life. We find that often it's we know the vicious cycle. We could all articulate right now, probably. It's, I was lured in. I find myself being subjected to doing things I don't want to do. Someone gave me some drugs or made a deal with me that I can get some drugs to help take the edge off of what I'm doing, to help me forget about it. And then I have to repay the debt for those drugs. And then I want to take more drugs to forget what I'm doing. And then they kind of just become numb for a long time. So I think it has a big thing to do with it. Part of the consistency of showing up, I think, is being there for when they are relatively clear-minded, and in that moment when they want to make a choice, that we could be ready for them. I hope that makes sense. I didn't mean, it's such a huge topic, but specifically, I don't see signs that people took drugs and therefore went into the sex trade to pay for their drugs. It's usually, I got lured in, I got duped into a situation, and I'm doing it to help me cope.
Thank you.
I'm sure there are exceptions to that.
Deacon Frank, can you say more about advocacy and, who are the partners we should be connecting with, et cetera?
Yeah. First of all, the National Center on Sexual Exploitation has a whole legal advocacy arm, a whole legal network. And they're doing huge things. They're like going after, so explore their legal center at the National Center of Sexual Exploitation, on sexual exploitation. And they're going after industries, like social media industries, and they're holding specific companies accountable for allowing back channel loopholes that make it easier for predators to prey upon vulnerable children, right? In the gaming world, in Instagram, TikTok world, the social media world. And they're fighting and they're winning. So take a look there. Sometimes that level of advocacy spills over into what states can do to prevent, local libraries from making pornography accessible and the like, or for prosecutors' offices to take a different stance. I think that's still a big fight. So talk to your local prosecutors, your city, your county prosecutors. I think there's probably going to be arms within most dioceses, if I'm not mistaken, that will help you to be aware of the legal landscape and how hospitable it is or hostile it is to, people living edifying lives. So I think there's a couple little channels, but I think the National Center is doing fantastic work. And I end up connecting our local advocacy group in our Washington State Catholic Conference to them on a lot of different topics. I hope that helps them. It's a great topic.
Absolutely. I think it's this conversation where we can't do this on our own. We have to figure out who our partners are, for sure.
I do think that's one of the biggest things, though. If we can get that right, and I love their audacious, beautiful language at the National Center. They say, we want to abolish pornography. We want to make the environment so hostile to pornographers that they just give up. Right? Isn't that fantastic?
Thank you. So I think the other thing too with advocacy is education. And maybe if you could say a little bit more. I know even in the Archdiocese of Seattle, way back when, we had a wonderful religious sister who started this Human Trafficking Coalition. And I know many of you are from an archdiocese or a diocese, and that's where you work. And everybody has to do safe environment now. And our hope was that we could actually do something in the safe environment program around human trafficking, so our kids can learn about it and be less vulnerable. But can you say more about the education piece and how that can help us?
Yeah, I'll say just quickly, I think the biggest opportunity in the educational sphere is to gently illuminate the realities of what happens among certain populations when we're exposed to the influence of pornography. I think we can't be afraid to go there because horrific things are happening. And if you talk to different families, no one wants to believe that their kid is participating in such things or is a victim of such things. And so it's a lot easier to kind of live in perpetual denial. It's safer. We want to think, oh, they're in a really good school and they're in extracurricular activities. And hey, this is heavy stuff. We don't want to believe that. But I think we have to get more nuanced at how to accompany kids. And all these podcasts from the National Center will help us with this. How to gently ask a couple questions here and there along the way. Got to engage the parents. It can't just be, well, they covered that at school, or I'm background checked, I'm fine. I think accompaniment is about becoming more and more intimate and asking vital questions, just in case, along the way, always. I don't think we can rely on filtering software or reporting software, because in this day and age, adults and kids have ways around all that stuff. This is about face-to-face relationship. So I maybe went a bit afield from the educational institutional setting. The final thing I'd say is the educational system is there to support parents, right? And they got to keep the parents engaged in this process.
And I know, thank you, Deacon Frank. I think one of the things I know is we've been given a lot of support locally, and especially by our clergy and by, we have an archbishop that's invested in this topic. So what do we say to our colleagues who are on this call today? Because many of them work at an archdiocese or a diocese, and they don't have the same level of support. So how do they go about doing this programming, whether it's inside a facility or outside a facility? How do they get support if they're just starting this on their own?
Yeah. I'd go back. This might sound frustrating, but allow yourself to go on a timeline that might take several years, but start by becoming survivor informed. Adopt that language. I think it's one of the ways we accompany people without even meeting them personally, is we start to be informed from their perspective. And I think the lifestory.org is a great way to be to have revealed for us some of these realities that we don't hear or talk about on a daily basis. That's going to inform our speech. That's going to help us recognize off-ramps. That's a big topic. How to prevent on-ramps, how to increase off-ramps for folks in the life. Right along with that, ask God for the grace to allow you to be comfortable in being the most unpopular person in the room at a given time, simply because you're pointing out the people who are suffering the most. I think you're probably all really comfortable with that already, is my sense. And there's a lot of embracing of a cross there, right? Being close to Christ who suffered. It's intimate relationship with people through their perspectives, even if we don't know them face to face. But the third piece I would add, if anything, if you have a chance to get close to a person who is a survivor or a current victim, get close to them and just say hi. And don't try to solve it, but just be on that path for 5 feet, 100 feet, whatever they let you do. Don't try to control, just respect them, because you're probably like a drop of cool, refreshing water on a dry, parched land, just because you're not expecting something from them. Anyway, you press a button on me, I kind of go off on a few different topics. I hope that didn't go too far afield there.
No, that's great. I think too, when we work with, and please, anybody, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat room, or you can take off your screen and say hi. But it's when we work with people inside, when we are with people and accompanying them, we don't necessarily know their story, because we don't ask their story. They share their story when they're ready to. But what are the signs to look for with people to maybe know or realize that they were trafficked at some point of their life, or they're a survivor? And that might be too broad. I can narrow that question in if needed.
So I'll point you to a resource, because I'm going to paraphrase it and probably miss a lot of stuff. But our resource is the lifestory.org. And then just by immersing ourselves into stories, some of the best language that I've heard, and it's a concept of a language, and we have to make it our own in our own language. But once you start to get to know somebody, there's a way to ask them if they have control. And it's like the National Human Trafficking Hotline questions, right? Hey, do you have control over what you do on a given day? Just, hey, when you're getting ready for reentry, I'm wondering, when you think of your daily life, do you have control over what you do or don't do? Do you have decision-making authority? I've asked that to a few people, and they'll either pause and lament and say, no, I don't, and I don't know how to get out. And then we're there together in the struggle. I've had some people just shut down and walk away because there's a lot of fear in that question as well. I can't talk to you about that because I'll get beat up. That's the Rachel Lloyd story, Girls Like Us. She'll tell you that a lot of the folks we're talking about have a fear of engaging in an intimate conversation with somebody for fear that they're going to get beat up if they're talking to anybody else other than their boyfriend trafficker. Right? So I keep going back to the prison environment as perhaps one of the safest places to have that discussion. I circled around that, Erica. Asking how much control do you have, and then studying that life story resource to consider what would it look like to offer an off ramp as someone's getting ready for reentry. Like maybe there's a new pathway that can be established. So it's not just the external organization comes in and talks to people, but we find out how to trigger their services, how to arrange for relocation. That's a big one. When someone's getting ready for reentry, do we need to send them to another part of the country to a safe house? Do we need to build a bigger network of safe houses? Yes, but do we just need to help them get out of town? Again, a lot of verbal processing there, but would love to pick apart anything that anybody heard.
No, this is great. And again, if anybody has questions, maybe if you could speak, and if I can push you a little more on that question, it's a lot of our community members who are on this call today work with people who are in gangs, and gangs, just get out of that lifestyle.
Right.
So I'm hearing that that's true for people that are in human trafficking or sex trafficking. They're stuck in a cycle. And where is our entry point? And where is our entry point? And is it safe when we help people escape or leave? Yeah. That might be a big question.
Here's the thing, and this is probably gonna be frustrating because it's not something that we could solve with a magic wand. Advocacy at the highest level makes the environment for a lot of the bad stuff to go away. So keep that going. That's my top tier advocacy. But when we're downstream talking with someone, it's inefficient. I think we're again planting seeds. We're throwing a little mustard seed into the situation when we just affirm their dignity. Let them know that they're worth freedom if they don't have it. Maybe risk some of that type of language. I don't know what's going on for you right now, but you're worth everything. You're worth safety and protection of the big prayers we get for out there. You're worth a life that's free from exploitation is a beautiful one. And I see a question from Mary Iverson. Mm-hmm. If someone wants to leave, how do you deal with fear and their safety? Not alone. Here's where I think it's a slow road. If there's not a local organization that can help them, acknowledge that it seems natural. All these things that we know, their fear is understood. They're worth being safe. But I get excited that here we are talking with each other from different locations, and a big part of helping people get to safety is relocation. I know my local group called REST is working on a national database so that they could immediately find out where there might be a safe house somewhere in the country, so we could put somebody in a bus, right, to get there. So, Mary, I'm probably frustrating you by not being able to give you a 3 bullet point answer on that one. Be with them in the fear and anxiety, and know that there are groups as we reach out, especially as we reach out beyond the Catholic world. There are a lot of groups that are doing fantastic stuff, and I think they're kind of waiting for us to show up and offer to help.
Thank you. That's great. And then just the cultural sensitivity to this question. And are there specific groups being targeted?
Here's where it's a societal thing. It's the sex trafficking is made up of those who purchase, who tend to be affluent, tend to have jobs, tend to be married, tend to have families. They have a lot of disposable income. The people who are sold and lured into trafficking tend to be cultural minorities, tend to be disproportionately Black, especially in our area. I'm not sure how it plays out here, but if you think about someone who maybe is from a socioeconomic group that is struggling a little bit more, when we're talking to our Archbishop and others about where we might start in recognizing those who are being exploited, we're starting to look at some of the hardest hit socioeconomic areas of our Archdiocese. Just knowing that statistically speaking, we're going to have a disproportionate number of victims coming from there. So I love the sensitivity, Karen. I don't know how to make the message culturally appropriate, except to maybe say, if we're looking for some low-hanging fruit, we're going to look at cultural minorities as those who are maybe more prone to getting lured into sex trafficking. And sadly, the traffickers themselves who are out of the life now will say they went after them because, and this sounds so harsh, they said, went after them because I knew that they wouldn't be missed as much. So something about the least of these, right? And how we're called to recognize Christ in the least of these, all that.
Well, thank you, Deacon Frank. This has been amazing. I just know you've been on this journey for a really long time. It's a new journey for many of us. And one of the things I can say is just doing former work in the prisons and the jails is just to have the conversation and to be transparent about the topic and to begin talking about the topic. So we're making the invisible visible.
Yeah.
And to say, especially when you're working with the women and the juvies, and men have been trafficked as well. So I don't want to minimize that.
Right.
But it's having the conversation to say, maybe it's how you, when you do a reflection or a Bible study, to begin integrating some of this into our conversation. And I just say this personally, I'm a mother of 3 kids and one of them's a 14-year-old girl, and she never goes to the mall ever without me having the conversation around human trafficking. Yeah. And I get the biggest eye roll, you'll ever see. But then I've heard my daughter talking to her friends about it. So it's making the invisible visible and teaching and educating and making it more transparent and real. So really, Deacon Frank, thank you. Do you want to, and thank you everybody today for participating. If you have questions for us, also we will be sharing all this information with you, all the resources with you. And then Deacon Frank, do you want to close us in prayer?
Oh, yeah, sure. Lord, thank you. This has all been an offering to you. We just pour ourselves out, knowing that you feed, you nourish, you give us all life, you sustain us. You hold us in the palm of your hand, and you desire your hand to reach more and more and more of your children. So we give it all away for free, Lord, knowing that you supply. Just help us remain grafted to you as we go about our day. Thank you for the gift of our brothers and sisters gathered here. We ask blessings upon their day. Light our path, Lord. Free us from any anxiety about not doing enough. Just know that we have finite capacity. We depend on you. Help us to do one thing at a time, doing only what's next, but always carrying all of your children in our heart and entrusting them to your providential care. Thank you. We ask all this through Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Thank you, Deacon Frank. And before everybody leaves, we do have our webinar next week. We want to continue this conversation on human trafficking and sex trafficking. And so if you're able, please join us. And so we can continue this dialogue and this conversation. And then also our event will be with Deacon Frank, one of our colleagues, Joe Cotton, and all of you know him because he was with CPMC for a long time. He and Father Dustin will be leading a session on the spirituality of accompaniment. I think in our work, we just have to remember that prayer is at the core of it and at the center. And then the final slide, if you haven't been able to look at this resource, I would really check it out. Who Do You Say That I Am? It's a Lenten reflection document that we've created to use in your parishes. You can adapt them to use at the facility where you minister. You can use them with young adults, college students. It's just a wonderful guide, and we just want to encourage you to use it whenever you want, and you can use it during the Lenten season or outside of the Lenten season, but we really encourage you to look at it. So again, everybody, thank you for being with us today. It's great to see everybody, and we'll see you soon.